would you do if you heard a cry for help in the dark, one so weak, so forgotten, that the world had stopped listening? Would you walk away, pretend you never heard it, or would you dare to step forward, even if it changed everything? This is the story of a dog who had lost hope, a mother who couldn't ignore his suffering, and the fragile thread of kindness that would bind their fates forever. Let us know where you're watching from. The Forgotten Shadow lived in the corner of a dilapidated garage on Maple Street. Rex, a once majestic German shepherd, had spent the last 7 months of his life chained to a rusty metal pipe, his world reduced to a 6-foot radius of cold concrete. His coat, once glossy and rich with color, now hung in matted clumps around his thin frame. His eyes, deep amber pools that once sparkled with life, had grown dim with each passing day of neglect. The garage rarely saw sunlight, just thin slivers that crept through cracks in the walls, teasing Rex with glimpses of a world he could no longer reach. The sounds of life outside tortured him daily. Children laughing, cars passing, the normal rhythm of a neighborhood that had forgotten about the dog suffering in their midst. Rex's owner, Marcus Fletcher, had once been a caring companion. But after losing his job and falling into depression, Marcus began spending more time at the local bar than at home. Rex became an afterthought, a burden, a reminder of happier times that Marcus couldn't bear to face. Food came irregularly, sometimes just scraps thrown hastily into a dirty bowl. Fresh water was a luxury that Rex learned to live without for days at a time. Winter had been the hardest. The garage offered little protection against the bitter cold that seeped through every crack and crevice. Rex would curl into a tight ball, his chain digging into his neck as he tried to preserve what little body heat remained. The concrete beneath him pulled warmth from his bones, leaving him shivering through long, dark nights. Neighbors occasionally heard his whimpers and howls, but few took notice. Those who did simply assumed Marcus was taking care of his dog. After all, why would anyone keep a pet they didn't want? But Emma Turner noticed. Living just 2 houses down, she had heard the desperate cries for help during her late-night walks with her infant son, Liam. At first, she tried to ignore them, telling herself it wasn't her business to interfere. But the sounds haunted her dreams, the plaintive whines that seemed to grow weaker with each passing week. One particularly cold Tuesday morning, something in Emma snapped. She bundled 3-month-old Liam in his warmest clothes, placed him securely in his carrier, and walked purposefully toward the Fletcher house, determined to at least check on the animal she feared was suffering. Emma's heart pounded against her ribcage as she approached the Fletcher property. The once welcoming yellow house now stood with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs, a physical manifestation of the decline happening within. She hesitated at the driveway, suddenly aware of how strange it might seem to knock on a neighbor's door and demand to see their dog. But another faint whimper from the detached garage steeled her resolve. Emma adjusted Liam's carrier on her arm and made her way around the side of the house. The garage door was slightly ajar, just enough for Emma to peer through the gap. What she saw made her stomach turn. The smell hit her first, a pungent mix of urine, feces, and despair that had accumulated over months of neglect. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she made out Rex's form in the corner. The German shepherd raised his head weakly at the sound of her approach, his chain rattling against the concrete. He didn't bark or growl. He simply watched with tired, wary eyes that had long ago given up hope of rescue. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, tears immediately welling in her eyes. She had prepared herself for a neglected animal, but the reality was far worse than she had imagined. Rex's ribs protruded sharply beneath his dull coat. A water bowl lay overturned and dry several feet away, just far enough that the chain around his neck prevented him from reaching it. A half-eaten piece of moldy bread sat nearby, apparently thrown in days ago. Emma pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, ready to call animal control, when the unexpected sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. Marcus Fletcher was home. Panic surged through her veins as she looked for somewhere to hide, but it was too late. The side door of the garage swung open, flooding the space with harsh daylight. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" Marcus demanded, his voice slurred even in the morning hours. The smell of alcohol wafted from him as he stumbled slightly, steadying himself against the doorframe. His bloodshot eyes narrowed as he recognized Emma. I heard your dog," Emma stammered, instinctively pulling Liam's carrier closer to her body. "I was worried about him." Marcus's face darkened. "Mind your own business, lady. Rex is fine. He's got shelter, doesn't he?" He gestured vaguely around the garage. "Better than some people have." Just then, Liam began to fuss in his carrier, his tiny face scrunching up as he sensed his mother's tension. The sound seemed to startle Rex, whose ears perked up slightly, the first sign of life beyond bare existence that Emma had seen from him. The dog's amber eyes fixed on the source of the new sound. "Look, I don't want trouble," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady as she gently rocked Liam's carrier. "But your dog needs help. He needs food, water, medical attention. This—" She gestured around the garage. "This is cruelty." Something in Marcus's face changed. A flash of shame, quickly buried beneath defensive anger. "You think I don't know that? You think I wanted this?" His voice cracked slightly. "I lost everything. My job, my wife, my savings. Rex he was from better times. I couldn't." He trailed off, running a hand through his greasy hair. The moment of vulnerability was brief. Marcus straightened, his face hardening again. "You have 10 seconds to get off my property before I call the cops for trespassing." Emma felt fear rise in her throat, but something made her stand her ground. Perhaps it was the way Rex's eyes hadn't left Liam's carrier, or perhaps it was the knowledge that if she walked away now, the dog might not survive another week of neglect. "I'll give you $500 for him," she blurted out. The offer surprised even herself. She didn't have money to spare as a single mother, but in that moment she couldn't think of another way. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Rex, then back at Emma, calculation evident in his bloodshot eyes. 1,000, he countered. 700, Emma replied without hesitation. "It's all I have in savings, please." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he shrugged. "Fine, take him. Not like he's good for anything anymore anyway." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. "Chain lock's over there." He nodded toward the pipe. Emma's hand trembled as she set Liam's carrier down just inside the garage door and took the key. As she approached Rex, the dog cowered slightly, uncertain whether this new human meant harm or help. The lock was rusted, and Emma struggled with it, tears blurring her vision as she worked. Finally, with a click that seemed to echo in the empty garage, the lock opened, and the heavy chain fell away from Rex's neck, revealing raw, infected skin underneath. "Come on, boy," Emma whispered, holding out her hand. "You're safe now." Rex didn't move. After months of confinement, the concept of freedom seemed foreign to him. He looked at Emma's outstretched hand with confusion, then back at the spot where his chain had been. The garage, as horrible as it was, had become his entire world. The unknown beyond it was terrifying. While Emma was focused on Rex, Liam had managed to wiggle one tiny hand free from his blanket. The movement caught Rex's attention. The baby made a soft cooing sound, his little fingers opening and closing in that unconscious way infants do. Something about the innocent gesture and sound seemed to awaken something long dormant in Rex. With agonizing slowness, he rose to his feet, legs trembling from weakness and disuse. Emma held her breath as the German shepherd took one tentative step toward her baby. Then another. His nose twitched as he caught Liam's scent. The pure, unmarred scent of new life. When Rex reached the carrier, Emma tensed, ready to protect her child. But the dog simply lowered his muzzle and delicately sniffed the baby's outstretched hand. Liam gurgled and smiled, completely unafraid. And then it happened. The moment that would stay with Emma forever. Rex's tail moved, just a small, weak wag, but it was the first expression of anything other than fear or resignation she had seen from him. In that moment, looking at her baby's innocent interaction with this broken creature, Emma knew her impulsive decision had been the right one. "I'll transfer the money today," Emma said to Marcus, who had been watching the interaction with a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like regret. He nodded curtly, avoiding her eyes, then handed her a frayed leash he pulled from a dusty shelf. "His papers are somewhere in the house," he muttered. "I'll find them and drop them in your mailbox." Emma didn't reply. She gently attached the leash to Rex's worn collar, careful to avoid touching the raw skin underneath. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "Let's go home." The journey back to Emma's house was agonizingly slow. Rex had clearly not walked more than a few feet in months. His muscles had atrophied, and his paws were tender on the pavement after so long on concrete. Every few steps he would stop, panting heavily, his legs trembling with the effort. Emma was patient, letting him set the pace, all while balancing Liam's carrier on her other arm. Neighbors peered through windows at the strange procession. A young mother, a baby, and a skeletal dog that barely resembled the proud German shepherd breed. Mrs. Kaminsky, an elderly woman who lived between the two houses, came out onto her porch as they passed. "Good Lord," she gasped, taking in Rex's condition. "Is that Marcus Fletcher's dog?" Emma nodded, not stopping their painfully slow progress. "Not anymore." Mrs. Kaminsky's face darkened. "I've called the police about that dog 3 times. They said they did welfare checks, but nothing ever changed." She approached cautiously, her own ancient beagle watching curiously from the doorway. "Would you like some help? I have some leftover meatloaf he might be able to eat." Tears welled in Emma's eyes at the simple kindness. "That would be wonderful, thank you." By the time they reached Emma's modest blue house at the end of the street, Rex was visibly exhausted. His tongue lolled from his mouth, and each breath came as a ragged pant. The 3 porch steps might as well have been a mountain. Emma gently lifted Liam's carrier to the top, then returned to help Rex, but the dog simply collapsed at the bottom, his strength completely spent. "Oh, Rex," Emma whispered, kneeling beside him. His amber eyes looked up at her with a mixture of confusion and surrender, as if to say, "I tried, I can't go any further." With a determination born of desperation, Emma scooped the large dog into her arms. He was frighteningly light, at least 30 pounds underweight, but still a challenge for her small frame. Somehow, through sheer will, she managed to carry him up the steps and into the house, laying him gently on the soft area rug in her living room. For a long moment, Rex simply lay where she placed him, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with trepidation. The softness beneath him seemed to confuse him after months of hard concrete. He sniffed tentatively at the rug, then at the air, which carried the scent of the cinnamon candle Emma had lit that morning. So different from the stench of the garage that had been his prison. Emma quickly prepared a shallow bowl of water and a small plate with tiny pieces of the meatloaf Mrs. Kaminsky had provided. She placed them near Rex, not too close to overwhelm him, but within reach. Then she settled Liam in his playpen nearby and sat cross-legged on the floor, giving Rex space while staying present. "You're safe now," she told him softly, over and over, as if the repetition might eventually make him believe it. "No more chains. No more cold. You're home." Rex watched her, still uncertain, his eyes occasionally darting to Liam, who babbled happily in his playpen. After nearly 20 minutes, Rex finally stretched his neck toward the water bowl and took a few tentative laps. Emma fought back tears as she watched him drink, then nibble cautiously at the meatloaf. Such simple acts that had been denied to him for so long. That night, Emma made a bed for Rex from old blankets placed in the corner of the living room, within sight of where Liam's portable crib stood. She didn't expect Rex to use it. Abandoned and abused dogs often sought out small confined spaces that felt secure, but she wanted him to have the option of comfort. To her surprise, after circling uncertainly for several minutes, Rex lowered himself onto the blankets with a deep sigh that seemed to come from his very soul. Throughout that first night, Emma woke frequently, partly to check on Liam as she always did, but also to ensure Rex was still there, still breathing. Each time, she found the German Shepherd exactly where she had left him, his eyes open, watching, not sleeping, but resting, as if afraid this new reality might vanish if he closed his eyes. The next morning, Emma called in sick to the elementary school where she worked as a librarian. Rex needed immediate veterinary attention, and she couldn't bear to leave him alone so soon after his rescue. She found a local vet who could see them that afternoon, Dr. Patel at Willow Creek Animal Hospital. Getting Rex into the car was another challenge. The dog froze at the sight of the vehicle, his entire body trembling. Emma wondered if cars represented further trauma for him. Perhaps Marcus had threatened to abandon him somewhere, or maybe the car simply reminded Rex of change and uncertainty. Either way, it took nearly an hour of gentle coaxing, with Liam already secured in his car seat, babbling encouragement in his own language, before Rex finally allowed Emma to help him into the back seat. Dr. Patel's face remained professionally neutral as she examined Rex, but Emma could see the controlled anger in the veterinarian's eyes as she documented each injury, each sign of neglect. "Severe malnutrition," Dr. Patel noted, running gentle hands along Rex's protruding ribs. "Muscle atrophy, pressure sores from lying on hard surfaces, neck trauma from the chain. This will need daily cleaning and antibiotic ointment." She looked into Rex's ears, then his mouth. Ear infection beginning. Dental issues, probably from chewing on his chain or the concrete in desperation. She paused, meeting Emma's eyes. This level of neglect didn't happen overnight. "I know," Emma whispered, one hand on Rex's head as the dog leaned slightly against her leg, the first time he had initiated contact. "I should have acted sooner." Dr. Patel's expression softened. "You acted. Many people never do." She glanced at Liam, who was watching the proceedings with wide, curious eyes from his carrier. "You have a special family here." The list of medications and special food was long, and Emma winced at the total on the bill. But she didn't hesitate. She would figure out the financial details later. Right now, Rex's recovery was all that mattered. As they were preparing to leave, the reception door opened and a police officer walked in. Emma's heart sank as she recognized Officer Daniels, who had coached her nephew's baseball team last summer. "Emma," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Mrs. Kaminsky said I might find you here." His eyes moved to Rex, who had pressed himself against Emma's legs at the sight of the uniformed stranger. "So it's true, you took Fletcher's dog." "I bought him," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Marcus sold him to me, legally. Officer Daniels' expression was unreadable. That's not what he's saying now. He filed a report this morning claiming his dog was stolen, says he was coerced while intoxicated. The floor seemed to drop from beneath Emma's feet. She clutched Liam's carrier tighter and instinctively placed her other hand on Rex's head. "That's not what happened," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He agreed. He took my money." $700, Officer Daniels said, consulting his notepad. "A purebred German Shepherd in good condition could be worth twice that. Fletcher claims you took advantage of his state." Dr. Patel, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "Officer, with all due respect, this dog is not in good condition. He's been severely neglected and abused. I've documented everything for my records, and I would be happy to provide an official statement." Officer Daniels looked at Rex more carefully, taking in the protruding ribs, the raw neck, the dull coat. His professional demeanor faltered slightly. "I see. Still, legally speaking," Dr. Patel interrupted firmly, "I am required by state law to report suspected animal abuse, which I will be doing immediately following this appointment. The documentation I've gathered today would be sufficient grounds for animal control to confiscate this dog from Mr. Fletcher's possession regardless." Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward the veterinarian. Officer Daniels seemed to consider this information, then sighed. "Look, Emma, I'm not here to take the dog back. Fletcher is a drunk, and everyone on the force knows it. But he's making a stink, and I had to follow up." He lowered his voice. "Between us, Fletcher's got a history of filing reports when he's been drinking, then dropping them when he sobers up. My guess is he woke up, realized what he'd done, and panicked about the money. He needs it for booze, not because he wants the dog back." Relief washed over Emma, but it was short-lived. "The thing is," Officer Daniels continued, "he's technically got a case, a verbal agreement while intoxicated with no witnesses." He trailed off meaningfully. "If he pushes it, you might have a problem." "What can I do?" Emma asked, unconsciously pulling both Liam and Rex closer to her. "Get it in writing," Officer Daniels advised. "A bill of sale, something official, and I'd suggest doing it soon, before he has time to think too much about it." He glanced at his watch. "I'm off duty in an hour. Unofficially, I could accompany you as a witness if you wanted to handle this today." Emma looked down at Rex, who was still pressed against her, his eyes darting anxiously between the humans speaking about his fate. In just 24 hours, he had already begun to trust her, to believe that perhaps humans could be kind again. The thought of returning him to that garage, even temporarily, was unbearable. "Yes," she said firmly, "let's do it today." The drive back to Marcus Fletcher's house was tense. Emma followed Officer Daniels' patrol car, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Rex lay with his head on his paws, occasionally making soft whimpering sounds whenever they slowed down or turned a corner. It was as if he recognized the route and feared they were returning him to his prison. Liam, sensing the tension, was unusually quiet in his car seat, his wide eyes taking in his mother's rigid posture. As they pulled up to the curb outside the Fletcher residence, Emma's stomach churned. The house looked even more decrepit in the afternoon light, with shutters hanging askew and trash spilling from overfilled bins at the side. A faded "For Sale" sign, weather-beaten and tilting, stood nearly hidden among the overgrown weeds of the front yard. Emma hadn't noticed it the day before in her urgency to check on Rex. Officer Daniels approached her window as she parked. "Wait here with the dog and your boy," he said quietly. "Let me talk to him first. Get a feel for the situation." Emma nodded gratefully, reaching back to place a reassuring hand on Rex's head. The dog had begun to tremble visibly, his eyes fixed on the garage where he had spent so many miserable months. His breathing came in quick, shallow pants, and a low, almost imperceptible whine escaped his throat. "It's okay, buddy," Emma whispered, though her own voice shook slightly. "You're not going back there, I promise." Through the windshield, she watched Officer Daniels knock on the front door, wait, then knock again more forcefully. After nearly a minute, the door swung open to reveal Marcus, looking considerably more disheveled than he had the previous day. Even from a distance, Emma could see that his hands were trembling, his face pale and slick with sweat. The telltale signs of alcohol withdrawal were evident in his unsteady stance and the way he squinted against the daylight. The conversation between Marcus and Officer Daniels grew animated. Marcus gesticulated wildly, his voice rising enough that Emma could hear fragments through her closed car windows. "My property. Wasn't thinking clearly. Need that money back." Officer Daniels remained calm, his posture non-threatening but firm. After several minutes, he turned and beckoned for Emma to join them. With a deep breath, she turned to look at Rex. "Stay here," she said firmly, meeting his amber eyes. "I'll be right back." She doubted the dog understood her words, but she hoped her tone conveyed her intention to return. As Emma approached the porch, Liam secure in his carrier on her arm, she could smell the sour odor of stale alcohol and unwashed clothes emanating from Marcus. His bloodshot eyes darted between her and Officer Daniels, then fixated on Liam with a strange intensity that made Emma instinctively turn her body to shield her child. "Mr. Fletcher," Officer Daniels began formally, "Ms. Turner tells me you agreed to sell your German Shepherd to her yesterday for $700. Is that correct?" Marcus's jaw worked, his gaze still unnervingly focused on Liam. "I wasn't thinking straight," he muttered. "She took advantage. $700 seems like a fair price for a dog in that condition," Officer Daniels replied evenly. "Dr. Patel at Willow Creek has documented extensive neglect and malnutrition. That's a separate issue we may need to discuss." Marcus paled further at the mention of documentation. His eyes finally shifted from Liam to Emma's face. "I need that dog back," he said, his voice suddenly desperate. "Or the money. I need the money back." "Why?" Emma couldn't stop herself from asking. "So you can drink it away while Rex suffers in that garage?" Marcus flinched as if she had slapped him. For a moment, raw pain flashed across his features. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I'm being evicted. The bank, they're taking the house in 3 days. I needed that money for a security deposit on an apartment. Without it, I've got nowhere to go." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Emma felt a conflicted surge of emotions. Pity for the man's situation warring with anger at what he had done to Rex. "Mr. Fletcher," Officer Daniels said quietly, "selling the dog was probably the most responsible decision you've made recently. Let's make it official, with proper documentation, and then we can talk about resources that might help with your housing situation." Marcus stared at the ground for a long moment, then gave a defeated nod. "Fine, whatever. Come in, I'll find his papers." The interior of the house was exactly as Emma had feared. Empty liquor bottles scattered across surfaces, unwashed dishes piled in the sink, the musty smell of a home that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. But amidst the chaos, she noticed other things too. Framed photographs on the walls of a younger, healthier Marcus with a smiling woman, and a German Shepherd puppy that could only be Rex. Books on dog training lined a dusty shelf. A collection of ribbon-adorned medals hung forgotten in a corner. Obedience competition awards with Rex's name, and Marcus's engraved on tarnished plaques. "You used to compete with him," Emma said softly, gesturing toward the medals as Marcus rummaged through a drawer. Marcus paused, his back to her. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Before Diane left, before everything went to hell." He turned, holding a folder of papers, his eyes meeting Emma's with surprising clarity. "He was a champion, you know. Best damn dog I ever had." For a brief moment, Emma glimpsed the man Marcus had once been, someone who had loved Rex, trained him, been proud of him. It made the dog's current condition even more heartbreaking. "Here." Marcus thrust the folder toward her. "AKC registration, pedigree, medical records. He's up to date on shots, or was, until last year." A flash of shame crossed his face. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I just couldn't keep it together." Officer Daniels produced a simple bill of sale form from his pocket and laid it on the kitchen table. "Let's make this official," he said, clicking a pen. $700 for one male German Shepherd named Rex, including all registration papers and medical records. Marcus signed without hesitation, his hand steadier than it had been minutes before. As he handed the pen to Emma for her signature, their eyes met again. "Will you let me say goodbye?" he asked, so quietly that Officer Daniels didn't hear. Emma hesitated, remembering Rex's terrified reaction to the sound of Marcus's voice the day before. But something in the man's expression, a genuine grief beneath the haze of addiction and desperation, moved her to nod. "Briefly," she said, "and only if he seems comfortable with it." When they returned to the car, Rex was exactly where Emma had left him, though he had moved to press himself against the far door, as far from the house as possible within the confines of the vehicle. His ears flattened against his head as Marcus approached slowly behind Emma. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Remember me?" Rex's response was immediate and heartbreaking. He cowered, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he tried to make himself even smaller against the door. His eyes, which had shown the first glimmers of trust when looking at Emma and Liam, were now wide with terror. The transformation seemed to shock Marcus. He stumbled back a step, the reality of what his neglect had done to their relationship finally hitting him with full force. "Jesus," he whispered, "he's afraid of me." Emma said nothing. There was nothing to say. The evidence of broken trust was displayed painfully before them. Marcus swallowed hard, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a worn leather dog tag with Rex's name engraved on it. "This should go with him," he said, pressing it into Emma's palm. It was from before. Before Emma could respond, a car pulled up behind Officer Daniels' patrol vehicle. A well-dressed woman emerged, clipboard in hand, her expression all business as she approached the house. "Mr. Fletcher," she called. "I'm Patricia Walsh from Coastal Realty. I'm here for the final property inspection before foreclosure." Marcus's face drained of color. "That's not supposed to be until Friday," he protested. The woman consulted her clipboard. "There's been a change of schedule. The bank moved up several properties in the portfolio, including yours. I need to complete the inspection today." Officer Daniels stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of something here. Is there any way you could come back in, say, 30 minutes? The real estate agent's professional smile didn't waver. I'm afraid not, officer. I have 8 properties to inspect today, and the paperwork must be filed by close of business." She turned to Marcus. "You received notification of this change last week, Mr. Fletcher. It was sent by certified mail." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "I haven't exactly been keeping up with my mail," he muttered. Emma watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. Marcus was about to be homeless today, not in 3 days as he had thought. The $700 she had given him, money she had earmarked for Liam's preschool enrollment next year, was all that stood between him and the streets. A moral dilemma twisted in her gut. This man had neglected Rex terribly, had allowed a once proud dog to waste away in filth and loneliness. He had chosen alcohol over his responsibilities. Yet he had also once been someone who celebrated Rex's achievements, who had trained and loved him. And now he had nothing. No home, no companion, no hope. What happened next would change all their lives in ways Emma could never have anticipated. As the adults talked tensely on the sidewalk, Liam began to fuss in his carrier. The sound immediately drew Rex's attention, just as it had in the garage. Despite his fear and the proximity of Marcus, the German shepherd inched closer to the baby, his posture protective rather than cowering. Emma glanced back at the car, and what she saw took her breath away. Rex had positioned himself on the seat next to Liam's carrier, his body forming a barrier between the baby and the open window on Marcus's side. Though still trembling slightly, the dog's demeanor had changed from terrified to watchful. When Liam reached a tiny hand toward Rex's fur, the dog permitted the touch, his eyes never leaving the scene outside the car. In that moment, an unexpected clarity washed over Emma. Rescuing Rex wasn't just about saving a dog from cruelty. It was about healing, both for Rex and perhaps for the humans caught in this situation as well. "Mr. Fletcher," Emma said suddenly, interrupting the tense conversation between Marcus and the real estate agent. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" The question caught everyone off guard. Marcus blinked in confusion, while Officer Daniels and the real estate agent exchanged puzzled glances. "What?" Marcus asked, his defensive posture faltering. "A real meal," Emma repeated, shifting Liam's carrier to her other arm. "Not just alcohol or whatever you could scrounge from the pantry. When was the last time?" Marcus stared at her, then looked away, embarrassment evident in the slump of his shoulders. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe a couple of weeks ago? The bar puts out free chips sometimes." Emma took a deep breath, scarcely believing what she was about to say. "I have a proposal for you," she stated, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "The garden apartment in my basement. It's small, just a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette. It needs work, but it's dry and warm. You can stay there for 2 weeks while you figure out your next steps." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Officer Daniels' eyebrows shot up in surprise, and the real estate agent's professional mask slipped momentarily to reveal astonishment. "Why would you do that?" Marcus asked, suspicion evident in his tone. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Emma replied. "I know you're hitting rock bottom. I know addiction is a disease, not a choice. And I know that Rex was important to you once." She gestured toward the car, where the German shepherd sat protectively next to Liam. "Look at him. Even after everything, he still remembers how to care. He's protecting my son." Marcus followed her gaze, his expression softening as he observed Rex's protective stance. A flash of the old bond between man and dog flickered briefly across his face. "There are conditions," Emma continued firmly. "First, the dog is still mine. That's non-negotiable. Second, you start attending AA meetings immediately. Third, you help me fix up the apartment. It needs painting and minor repairs. I'll pay for materials, you provide the labor. And fourth, you find a job within those 2 weeks. Any job, even if it's just stocking shelves at the supermarket." Officer Daniels stepped closer to Emma, lowering his voice. "Are you sure about this? You have a baby to think about." Emma nodded, though her heart raced with the enormity of what she was offering. The apartment has a separate entrance and— She hesitated, then continued with determination. Sometimes people just need someone to believe they can be better. Marcus stood frozen, staring at Rex in the car, then at Emma and Liam. The real estate agent checked her watch impatiently. "Mr. Fletcher, I need to complete this inspection," she reminded him. "You have 30 minutes to remove any personal belongings you wish to keep." The urgency of his situation seemed to finally penetrate Marcus's shock. He looked at Emma, his bloodshot eyes suddenly clear with decision. "Why would you help me after what I did to Rex?" Emma shifted her gaze to her son, then to Rex. "Because Liam deserves to grow up knowing that people can change, that second chances matter, and because Rex deserves to see that not all of his life with you was bad." For the first time, a single tear slid down Marcus's weathered cheek. He wiped it away quickly, nodding once, sharply. "Okay," he said hoarsely. "Okay, I accept." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marcus gathered his few important possessions, mostly photographs, some clothes, and a box of mementos. The real estate agent completed her inspection, making notes about the property's condition with pursed lips and frequent sighs. Officer Daniels, who had initially planned to leave once the bill of sale was signed, stayed to help load Marcus's belongings into his patrol car, offering to transport them to Emma's house. As they worked, Emma called her neighbor, Mrs. Kaminsky, who had offered help earlier, and explained the situation. The elderly woman agreed to watch Liam for a few hours while Emma got Marcus settled. By sunset, Marcus was sitting awkwardly at Emma's kitchen table, looking out of place and deeply uncomfortable, as she prepared a simple dinner of spaghetti and jarred sauce. Rex lay in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, positioned where he could see both Liam in his playpen and Marcus at the table. The dog's body language had changed subtly, still wary, still ready to move at the first sign of threat, but no longer trembling with fear. "The apartment entrance is around back," Emma explained as she stirred the pasta. "I'll show you after dinner. It's been empty since my tenant moved out 3 months ago. The shower works, but the sink in the bathroom drips. That would be a good first repair project." Marcus nodded silently, his eyes repeatedly drawn to Rex. The German shepherd met his gaze steadily each time, neither cowering nor approaching, maintaining his chosen post as guardian. "He was 8 weeks old when I got him," Marcus said suddenly, breaking the awkward silence. "My wife, Diane, she'd been wanting a dog for years. I surprised her for our anniversary." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He was so small then, all ears and paws. Diane cried when she saw him. Emma remained quiet, sensing that Marcus needed to speak, to remember the man he had been before alcohol had consumed his life. "We took him to training classes twice a week. He was smart, picked things up faster than any other dog there. Started competing in obedience trials when he was a year old." Marcus's voice grew softer. "Diane left 3 years ago, said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. I promised I'd get help, but I didn't. And then I lost my job at the construction company. Couldn't keep my hands steady enough to work safely." He looked down at his hands, which still trembled slightly. Didn't mean to hurt him, just couldn't function. Couldn't take care of myself, let alone him. Should have given him away sooner, to someone who could care for him properly. But he was the last connection I had to my old life, to Diane. Emma placed a plate of spaghetti in front of him. "Eat," she said simply. "Then we'll get you settled." Marcus looked at the steaming plate, then up at Emma with a vulnerability that made him appear younger, almost childlike. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked again. Emma considered her answer carefully. 6 years ago, someone gave me a chance when I needed one, she finally replied. I was 19, pregnant, and my boyfriend had just left me. My high school English teacher, Mrs. Holloway, let me stay in her guest room until Liam was born, helped me apply for college scholarships, watched him while I went to classes. She smiled softly at the memory. She believed I could be more than my circumstances. I'm just paying it forward. They ate in silence after that, the only sounds being Liam's occasional babbling from the living room and the click of Rex's nails on the hardwood floor as he adjusted his position. When they finished, Emma showed Marcus to the basement apartment. It was indeed small, with a twin bed against one wall, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom with a shower stall. The walls were bare, the paint peeling in places, but it was clean and dry. I'll bring down some bedding and towels, Emma said. The previous tenant left that small TV, and the Wi-Fi password is on the fridge upstairs. Tomorrow we can talk about what supplies we need for the repairs. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his few possessions in boxes at his feet, looking lost and overwhelmed. Thank you, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. As Emma turned to leave, he spoke again. Would it be okay if I sat with Rex for a little while before I turn in? Just sitting, not trying to touch him or anything, just want him to know I'm sorry. Emma hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. Let's see how he responds, she said finally. We'll follow his lead. Back upstairs, Rex had moved to lie beside Liam's playpen, where the baby had fallen asleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The German shepherd raised his head as Emma and Marcus entered, his ears swiveling forward, alert but not alarmed. Marcus sat on the floor a good distance away, his back against the wall. He made no move toward Rex, simply sat there, occasionally speaking in a low, gentle voice. Hey, buddy, remember when we used to go to the lake? You'd swim for hours chasing those tennis balls. Never got tired. He smiled faintly. Remember that squirrel in the backyard? The one you could never catch? Used to drive you crazy. Emma busied herself folding laundry, keeping a watchful eye on the interaction. To her surprise, after nearly 30 minutes, Rex slowly stood, stretched, and cautiously approached Marcus. The dog stopped several feet away, sniffing the air cautiously, his tail hanging low but not tucked between his legs. Marcus remained perfectly still, his eyes brimming with tears. I'm so sorry, Rex, he whispered. So damn sorry. Rex took another step forward, then another, until he was close enough to sniff Marcus's outstretched hand. The dog flinched slightly when Marcus's fingers twitched, but he didn't retreat. For several breathless moments, man and dog regarded each other, one seeking forgiveness, the other deciding whether it could be granted. Then, so subtly that Emma almost missed it, Rex lowered his head and, briefly, fleetingly, allowed Marcus's fingers to brush the top of his head. It was the barest whisper of contact, over in an instant, as Rex immediately retreated to his spot beside Liam's playpen. But it had happened. Marcus looked up at Emma, his face wet with tears. Did you see that? He asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Emma nodded, her own eyes moist. It's a start, she said gently. Just a start. That night, after Marcus had gone downstairs to his new temporary home and Liam was asleep in his crib, Emma sat on the living room floor beside Rex, gently brushing his neglected coat. The dog leaned slightly into the brushstrokes, his eyes heavy-lidded with contentment. You're an amazing soul, she told him softly. So much capacity for forgiveness. Rex sighed deeply, resting his chin on her knee. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering gently against the windows. Emma thought about the strange turn her life had taken in just 2 days. From a single mother with a quiet routine to someone with a traumatized dog and a recovering alcoholic in her basement. It was crazy, possibly even dangerous. And yet, watching Rex's chest rise and fall in his first peaceful sleep since she had found him, Emma felt a certainty that she had made the right choice. Little did she know that the real challenges were just beginning. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the rain still falling steadily. Emma woke to Liam's babbling through the baby monitor and the unfamiliar sound of movement downstairs. For a disorienting moment, she forgot about Marcus in the basement apartment. Then reality rushed back, and she quickly checked on Rex, who had spent the night on his blanket nest in the corner of her bedroom. The German Shepherd was awake, his ears perked toward the sounds from below. He didn't appear frightened, merely alert. When Emma sat up, his attention shifted to her, and his tail gave that small hesitant wag that still made her heart swell. "Morning, buddy," she said softly. "Ready to start our first full day together?" After changing Liam and getting him settled in his high chair with some cereal, Emma ventured downstairs to check on Marcus. She found him already awake, sitting at the small table in his kitchenette, a cup of instant coffee before him. He looked terrible, pale and sweating, his hands shaking so badly that coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug. "Withdrawal," he said grimly when he saw her concerned expression. "Been through it before. It gets worse before it gets better." Emma hesitated in the doorway. "Do you need to see a doctor? I've heard alcohol withdrawal can be dangerous." Marcus shook his head. "Not my first rodeo. I know the warning signs if it gets that bad." He attempted a weak smile that looked more like a grimace. "Got the number for the AA meeting. There's one at noon at the community center. I'll go." "I can drive you," Emma offered, surprised by his initiative. "Better if I walk," Marcus replied. "Need to clear my head," and he looked away, embarrassment evident in his posture. "Probably better if people don't see you dropping me off. Small town, people talk, don't want them thinking you're involved with someone like me." The raw honesty of his statement caught Emma off guard. "I'm not ashamed to help someone," she said firmly. Marcus finally met her eyes. "Maybe not. But you should be careful who you let into your life. You have the little one to think about." He took a shuddering breath. "Look, I appreciate what you're doing, more than I can say. But I know what I am right now. Been trying to get sober for 3 years, never managed more than a few weeks." "What's different this time?" Emma asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Rock bottom," he finally answered. "And seeing Rex with your boy, remembering what it felt like to be responsible for something good, something pure." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Don't know if I can do it. Been disappointing people for so long, it's like a habit." His voice caught. "But I'd like to try. Really, try this time." Emma nodded, understanding the courage it took to admit such vulnerability. "One day at a time, right? Isn't that what they say?" A ghost of a genuine smile touched Marcus's lips. "Yeah, 1 hour at a time, sometimes." As Emma turned to go back upstairs, Marcus called after her. "Is Rex okay? This morning, I mean." "He's good," Emma replied. "Slept through the night. Dr. Patel said it would take time for him to recover physically, but he's already showing signs of improvement." Relief washed over Marcus's haggard face. "Good, that's good." The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Marcus attended AA meetings daily, sometimes twice a day when the cravings became overwhelming. He worked steadily on the basement apartment, painting the walls a warm beige, fixing the dripping sink, replacing the worn linoleum in the kitchenette. Emma provided the supplies, and Marcus provided the skilled labor. his construction background evident in the quality of his work. Rex's physical recovery progressed more rapidly than Dr. Patel had predicted. With proper nutrition, medication for his infections, and gentle exercise, his coat began to regain its luster, and the raw wound around his neck healed to a ring of scar tissue that would always remind them of his ordeal. More remarkable was his emotional recovery. The German Shepherd became Liam's constant companion, lying patiently beside the baby during tummy time, watching attentively as Liam practiced rolling over and sitting up. With Marcus, Rex maintained a cautious but evolving relationship. He no longer cowered when Marcus entered a room, and occasionally he would accept a treat from the man's hand or permit a brief pat on his back. These small moments of forgiveness seemed to affect Marcus deeply. Emma often caught him watching the dog with a mixture of regret and hope that spoke volumes about his own journey toward redemption. By the end of the first week, Marcus had found work at the local hardware store, a part-time position that the owner, Mr. Jenkins, had created specifically after hearing about Marcus's construction skills and his efforts to rebuild his life. The job wasn't much, 20 hours a week at minimum wage, but it was a start, a foothold in the working world again. "He's giving me a chance," Marcus told Emma one evening as they shared dinner at the kitchen table, a new routine that had developed organically. Said he'd been meaning to offer more handyman services through the store anyway. If it works out, he might increase my hours. Emma smiled, genuinely pleased for him. "That's wonderful, Marcus." Rex, who had been lying in his usual spot in the doorway, suddenly rose and padded over to Marcus's chair. To everyone's surprise, the dog gently placed his head on Marcus's knee, looking up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. It was the first time Rex had initiated contact with his former owner. Marcus froze, afraid that any movement might break the spell. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. With exquisite gentleness, he lowered his hand to rest it lightly on Rex's head. The dog permitted the touch, even leaned into it slightly before returning to his post by the door. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Emma wasn't expecting visitors, and a flicker of concern crossed her face. It was nearly 8 p.m., an unusual time for casual callers. When she opened the door, Emma found herself face to face with a woman she didn't recognize. Slender, well-dressed, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The stranger's eyes, a striking blue-gray, widened at the sight of Emma. "Oh," the woman said, clearly thrown off. "I'm sorry. I must have the wrong house. I'm looking for Marcus Fletcher?" Before Emma could respond, Marcus appeared behind her, drawn by the familiar voice. His face drained of color. "Diane?" he whispered, as if seeing a ghost. The woman stared past Emma, her composed expression cracking to reveal shock, then a complex mixture of emotions, concern, wariness, and something that might have been hope. "Marcus," she said softly, "you look different." Rex, who had been watching from the doorway, suddenly bounded forward, his entire body wiggling with excitement as he recognized the newcomer. The transformation was astounding, from cautious, traumatized dog to joyful, exuberant pet in an instant. "Rex!" Diane gasped, dropping to her knees on the porch as the German Shepherd rushed to her, whining with happiness, licking her face, pressing his body against hers in an unmistakable display of love and recognition. Tears sprang to her eyes as she buried her face in his fur. "Oh my God, Rex, I've missed you so much." When she looked up, her tear-streaked face was full of confusion. "I don't understand. The real estate agent handling Marcus's foreclosure called me. She found my contact information in some old papers during the clear-out. She said the house was empty, that Marcus had left, and she was worried about Rex." Her eyes moved from Emma to Marcus, then back to the dog now pressed firmly against her side. "What's going on? Why is Rex here?" And she looked at Marcus more carefully, noting his clear eyes and steady hands. "Are you sober?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice steadier than Emma had ever heard it. 14 days, he said simply. "Not long, but it's a start." Diane's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's good, Marcus." An awkward silence fell, broken only by Rex's continued whines of joy, as he pressed against Diane, unwilling to let her out of his sight now that she had returned. Emma, sensing the tension and history between the pair, stepped back. "Why don't you come in?" she offered. "I think we all have a lot to talk about." The four of them settled in Emma's modest living room. Emma, with Liam dozing in her arms, Marcus perched anxiously on the edge of the sofa, Diane in the armchair with Rex pressed firmly against her legs, his head resting on her knee as if afraid she might disappear again if he lost contact. As the evening unfolded, their stories emerged piece by piece. Diane had left 3 years ago after Marcus's drinking had made their home life unbearable. She had wanted to take Rex, but Marcus had refused, claiming the dog was the only thing he had left. Unable to fight anymore, emotionally exhausted from years of trying to help a husband who wouldn't help himself, Diane had finally walked away, settling in a city 2 hours north where she'd rebuilt her life as an accountant for a non-profit organization. "I never stopped thinking about Rex," she admitted, tears shimmering in her eyes as she stroked the German shepherd's head. "I called a few times in the first year, asked how he was doing. Marcus always said he was fine." Her gaze shifted to Marcus, pain evident in her expression. "I believed you." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "I was too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten," he said quietly. "Too proud to let you know you were right to leave." Diane's attention turned to Emma. "How did you end up with Rex? And Marcus staying here? I don't understand." Emma explained everything. Hearing Rex's cries from the garage, the confrontation with Marcus, the impulsive decision to buy the dog, the veterinary visit, and finally the unexpected offer of temporary housing when Marcus faced immediate eviction. Diane listened in stunned silence, her fingers never ceasing their gentle stroking of Rex's fur. When Emma finished, Diane looked at her ex-husband with new eyes, seeing past the familiar features to the changes beneath, the clarity in his gaze, the steadiness that hadn't been there in years. 2 weeks sober, she said softly. "The longest you've managed since you left," Marcus finished for her. "I know it's not long. No, I've said I'd change before and failed. But this time," he glanced at Rex, then at Emma and Liam. "This time I hit bottom and found something else there besides more darkness." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room, broken only by Liam's soft baby breaths and Rex's contented sighs as Diane's fingers found the spot behind his ears that he had always loved. "What happens now?" Emma finally asked, looking between the former couple. Diane straightened in her chair, her professional demeanor returning. "I came for Rex," she said firmly. "When the real estate agent called, I thought he might have been abandoned or taken to a shelter. I was prepared to take him home with me tonight." She looked down at the dog, who gazed back at her with complete adoration. "He was mine too, you know. I helped train him, loved him." Marcus nodded, resignation in his posture. "He was always more your dog than mine," he admitted, "even before he listened to you better, stayed closer to you." Emma felt a knot form in her throat. She had known Rex for only 2 weeks, yet the thought of giving him up created a physical ache in her chest. She looked down at Liam, remembering how the German shepherd had positioned himself protectively beside the baby from the very beginning, how he checked on Liam throughout the day, how he seemed to understand that this small human needed his watchful care. "Rex belongs with someone who loves him," Emma said finally, her voice unsteady. "He's been through so much, he deserves stability, happiness." Diane studied Emma carefully. "You've grown attached to him." "We both have," Emma replied, glancing at Liam. "But I've learned that love sometimes means letting go." The words hung in the air, laden with meaning that extended beyond the dog. Diane's gaze shifted to Marcus, then back to Rex, her expression troubled. "I have an apartment that doesn't allow pets over 20 pounds, she said slowly. "I'd been planning to move if I found Rex, but my lease runs for another 6 months. She hesitated, then continued. "And I work long hours, sometimes travel for the job. Rex would be alone a lot." An idea began to form in Emma's mind, one that seemed both impossible and perfectly right. "What if?" She began carefully. "What if we shared him? Rex could stay here with me and Liam during the week, where he has a yard and companionship during the day. You could have him on weekends, or whenever you're in town." Diane's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Co-parenting a dog with a stranger?" Emma smiled gently. "We're not exactly strangers anymore, and Rex clearly loves you." As if understanding the conversation, Rex lifted his head from Diane's knee and looked between the two women, then patted over to Liam's sleeping form, sniffing the baby gently before returning to Diane's side. The message seemed clear. He loved them both. "And what about you?" Diane asked Marcus directly, addressing him fully for the first time that evening. "Where do you fit in this arrangement?" Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm just trying to stay sober one day at a time," he said honestly. "Working at the hardware store, paying Emma rent for the apartment downstairs. When my 2 weeks are up, well, I'm saving for my own place, not asking for anything more than I've earned." A complex emotion flickered across Diane's face, perhaps respect, perhaps the faintest stirring of something that had long been dormant. 2 weeks, she repeated. "That's longer than I've seen you go in years." 29 days was my record, Marcus said with a sad smile. 4 years ago, after that scare with your father's heart attack. I made it 29 days, thought I had it beaten, celebrated with just 1 drink. You know the rest. Diane nodded, the memory evident in her eyes. "What's different this time?" she asked, the question identical to Emma's from 2 weeks earlier. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Everything," he finally said. "I lost everything. You, the house, almost lost Rex to neglect. Hit a bottom so low I couldn't pretend anymore that I was in control." He looked at Emma. "And then someone showed me kindness I didn't deserve, gave me a chance I hadn't earned, made me want to be worthy of that chance." In the silence that followed, the rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Liam stirred in Emma's arms, his small face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. Rex moved between Diane and Marcus, seemingly trying to bridge the gap between them, his presence a living reminder of what they had once shared. "One day at a time," Diane said softly, almost to herself. "That's what they say, right?" Marcus nodded. "Sometimes 1 hour at a time, sometimes 1 minute." Diane took a deep breath, then looked at Emma. "Your idea about sharing Rex, we could try it, on a trial basis." She hesitated, then added, "And maybe I could come by more often, to see Rex, I mean." The layers of meaning beneath her words weren't lost on anyone in the room. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, hope and caution warring in his expression. "I'd like that," Emma said warmly. "Rex would, too." As the clock neared midnight, they worked out practical arrangements. Diane would stay at a local hotel tonight, spend tomorrow with Rex, and take him home with her for the weekend. She would bring him back on Sunday evening. They exchanged phone numbers, email addresses, and emergency contacts with the careful attention of parents arranging a custody agreement. When Diane finally stood to leave, promising to return in the morning, Rex followed her to the door, whining softly as she prepared to go without him. "It's okay, boy," she soothed, kneeling to embrace him one last time. "I'm coming back. I promise." As the door closed behind her, Rex stood staring at it for several long moments, his tail drooping slightly. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to contain all the complex emotions of the evening, he turned and padded back to where Emma sat with Liam. He settled at their feet, his warm body leaning gently against Emma's legs, his amber eyes meeting hers with a trust that brought tears to her eyes. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good, brave boy." Marcus excused himself to return to the basement apartment, his face a complex mixture of emotions, hope, fear, gratitude, and the weight of all he had lost and might yet regain. At the doorway, he paused, looking back at the scene. Emma, Liam, and Rex, a family that had formed through chance and compassion. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." After he left, Emma sat in the quiet living room, Liam sleeping peacefully against her chest, Rex warm against her legs. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean. She thought about the strange journey that had brought them all together, a chain of events that had begun with an act of cruelty and led, somehow, to this moment of fragile grace. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Emma stood in her backyard, watching as Rex chased a tennis ball thrown by Marcus. The dog's coat gleamed in the sunlight, healthy and thick, his body strong and vibrant with life. The raw wound around his neck had healed completely, leaving only a thin ring of scarred fur that would always be a reminder of where he had been, but not a limitation on where he could go. Marcus, 67 days sober now, laughed as Hyrex returned the ball, dropping it at his feet with a playful bark that would have been unimaginable in the fearful, broken dog Emma had found in that garage. The basement apartment had become a more permanent arrangement. Marcus paid rent on time from his now full-time position at the hardware store, attended his AA meetings religiously, and had slowly, cautiously begun rebuilding his relationship with Diane, who visited every weekend to spend time with Rex. Liam, now crawling with determined energy, watched the game from his blanket on the grass, clapping his hands delightedly each time Rex bounded past. The German shepherd checked on the baby frequently, circling back to give him gentle licks on his cheeks that sent Liam into peals of laughter. Emma couldn't help marveling at the transformation that had occurred in all their lives. Rex, once chained and neglected, now moved with the confident grace that had made him a champion in his younger days. Marcus, once lost in the grip of addiction, now stood straight and clear-eyed, rebuilding his life one sober day at a time. And Diane, who had arrived that night expecting to find only her beloved dog, had instead found a path back to the man she had once loved, a road they were navigating with careful, deliberate steps. As for Emma herself, the impulsive decision to knock on a stranger's door, to stand up for a suffering animal, had expanded her world in ways she could never have anticipated. Her home, once quiet and orderly, now pulsed with life and the beautiful complexity of human and animal connections. She had given Rex a second chance at life, but in return, he had given all of them something far more precious: the opportunity to see that even in the darkest garage, chained by circumstances that seemed hopeless, the capacity for love and forgiveness remained undiminished. That evening, As the October sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, Emma sat on her porch swing with Liam on her lap. Rex lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws as he watched the yard with contented vigilance. Inside, Marcus and Diane were preparing dinner together, their weekly Sunday ritual before Diane would return to her apartment in the city, a departure that grew more reluctant with each passing week. "You know," Diane had said to Emma earlier that day as they watched Marcus teaching Rex a new trick, "I never thought I'd be thankful for that real estate agent's call. I came looking for a dog and found—" She gestured at the scene before them, at a life slowly healing, at possibilities unfolding, all of this. Emma smiled, remembering the frightened dog in that dark garage, the baby whose innocent touch had sparked a moment of connection, the chain that had fallen away to reveal the path forward. "Sometimes," she replied, "the most precious things come from the most unexpected places." Rex, as if sensing her thoughts, raised his head from his paws and met her gaze with those soulful amber eyes, now bright with life and trust. In that silent exchange lay all the words that mattered, of gratitude, of friendship, of the unbreakable bond forged between souls who had found each other when they needed it most. The German Shepherd had once been chained in a garage for months, neglected and forgotten. But what a human baby had done, reached out with perfect innocence to touch a wounded heart, had indeed put everyone who witnessed it in tears. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of recognition at the profound truth that lay at the center of their shared story, that salvation comes in many forms, that second chances are always possible, and that sometimes the hands that free us from our chains are the very ones we least expect.